Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Gladiators, the show where we discuss and debate literature in all of its forms. If it's written work, it's game. Let's meet the panel.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Ari.
Karl.
And I'm Josh. And today we are going to be going over a document, which is...
It's more of a speech.
More of a speech. It's
monologue.
A discussion, because technically it's two people that are driving this home. But we're going to be talking about a very prominent figure in American television, even, you could say, I don't know so much a global entity, but...
and then also a man who was so dead set against changing his mind by 30 or 40 other people, and that this one man was able to change his mind.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking about Mr. Fred Rogers, a children's television icon. And we're specifically going to be talking about Mr. Rogers' testimony to Congress on May 1st, 1969, with the intent of being able to pick up funding for public broadcasting.
Which I think at the time President Nixon was going to try and cut that
in half.
Yes.
And imagine like what would have happened if he did. Mm-hmm. We would have half the shows that you see now, possibly even public television in and of itself, would be gone.
The difference, this is right when it was beginning. Sesame Street would not come on for another 6 months, and Mr. Rogers was in its first year. In today's day and age, Sesame Street would be able to survive on its own because it's a multi-million-dollar. I don't know if you'd say $1 billion. I would say at least multi-million. That it would be able to survive without public broadcasting, and it has. But
back then, everything was just starting off.
Yeah, and this is, you could not really give give a devastating blow to something in its fruition, and I think that this was a crucial moment between Mr. Rogers and the one that was leading this, Senator John Pastore.
It's hard to believe that when you see the infancy, the beginning of public broadcasting, and the whole concept of having the TV stations pay for rights to show Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Remember, he was talking about that, about how it's like a brand new concept that PBS and public broadcasting, or public broadcasting in general, that they were allowing the TV stations to air it, but they had to pay for it. So it was kind of like everybody kind of chipped in. So
and it cost a lot more than you would think to actually. Mr. Rogers made reference. It cost $6,000 for 2 minutes of a cartoon to properly be executed. You have a discussion starter, Ari?
Well, I mean, the discussion starter, I suppose, would be the discussion. Like, what do you think about this discussion, about what Mr. Rogers had said, to be able to convince a man who 30 people or so had spoken before Mr. Rogers even was there, and they had lost all hope that this funding was going to stay. Because Pastore was very much he was definitely a very, I am going to say this, he was a little bit stubborn, and he really was so, for the cutting of the fund. He was completely for it. So what, and then Mr. Rogers just waltzes in, says what he has to say. He did it, he said, he even said, I have this speech here, but I'm not going to read it because that doesn't explain my emotions enough. So my question, it's not really even a question, it's just more of a statement. Mr. Rogers clearly did something, in the way he spoke, or maybe what he said, maybe that quote he gave. What do you think it was that caused such a stubborn man to change his mind and change history forever?
I think he was very, just the way he presented himself, and also the fact that he was able to provide an example. Because he himself had a show in public broadcasting, and it was doing this, it was engaging in this practice to connect with children in a way that was much more real and authentic, as opposed to, as Mr. Rogers said, bopping somebody on the head to try and get a message across.
Yeah, that's how cartoons
and
work.
then quoted a song that he put together.
What do you do with the mad that you feel?
And he sang that song several times on his show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sure that Pastore had, I don't know if it was mentioned there or not, but I'm sure he had a family. I'm sure he had kids or grandkids. Mm-hmm. So he's on the kind of like the same level as Mr. Rogers was, as Fred Rogers were, because you know, he was able to. I think that was part of it. I think it's a series of things that made this guy give him the money, but it wasn't just one particular thing. It was a series of things, and one of them being that he was respectful, and he was also. I mean, he was right about. You know, he was concerned about the children of today, and you know, so I think it was a whole series of things that convinced him.
And I know if you watch that video, when Mr. Rogers is, you know, saying the lyrics to that song he made, and you see the cutaway to Pastore, he is clearly emotional. You can see it in his face.
Yeah.
You can see it in his eyes. There's something about what he said right there that got to him. And then literally the next thing he says is, well, it looks like you got that $1 million.
You just won the $20 million.
You earned it.
But I mean, as
and
far
this
as
is beautiful.
as far as facial expression, it really began. It had an impact. But Senator Pastore had that same. He had that snarkiness, especially where. Well, would it make you feel better to read
to just read it?
Well, that was before he said that.
Yeah, but he used a very similar tone when he told him, "Well, you just won the $20 million." He didn't change character, but you could tell he had an impact.
And Pastore, yeah, you're right. He was a little bit snarky.
Well, if you look at his body language at the very beginning of that, he goes, "All right, Rogers, the floor is yours." And he was kind of like this.
He
like,
takes his glasses off. He's like, "All right, Rogers."
He was, but his whole body was kind of shifting toward toward Fred, and he was kind of like this. He's like, "All right, you got the floor." So he was expecting a fight, I think, and maybe all those other 30 people, maybe they used the same technique of like being, you know, like a Hollywood producer would try to sell something.
Do you happen to have the lyrics of that song on you?
No, I do not. Not a physical copy.
Okay. Well, there is a. We know.
I think when it came to this, a lot of this came to me. I think the visuals and the auditory, or the auditory, what I saw through the films, and then
the transcript.
But more so when I was watching the YouTube video, I think that had a lot to. That's pretty. I mean, I read the transcript, but what I memorized was that, and then watching. Won't You Be My Neighbor yesterday.
Which I was going to go into that with Won't You Be My Neighbor. The guy who was actually talking about the Pastore Rogers court thing, that is actually one of my teachers from Rowan. His name is Professor David Bianculli. He taught my TV appreciation of 60s and 70s class, and he taught my TV appreciation of 50s. And honestly, he was one of the best teachers I had. But like, he was very. I remember when in class he was passionate about like Mr. Rogers. He mentioned it a couple times. I mean, he also mentions other 60s icons as well. I mean, Ernie Kovacs, as Trevor's nodding behind camera there. But like he's also been on CNN's the 60s and the 70s. So I remember one time he actually brought up a little bit of what happened with Mr. Rogers in class, and he's just that's kind of how I got interested into this particular this testimony here. Then when I saw that Would You Be My Neighbor, and I saw him in there, I'm like, oh, of course it's going to be him, because I mean, well, who else would be able to have to talk about that? And they showed even more footage of it, and then just I'm like, wow. And then I did more research on it, and it's just a fascinating moment in history that is overlooked, I think.
The most one of the interesting things to bring to the table is what Mr. Rogers accomplished within his first year with his show.
The assassination thing.
In the first week.
With Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah, that one too. It was you had the primetime special with you had Daniel Striped Tiger talking to Lady Aberlin and the balloon and what assassination was. But in the very first week, in the neighborhood of Make Believe, they were talking about the war in Vietnam, or they were setting up a situation pertaining that was meant to address the war in Vietnam. And then shortly after this one, a week later, was he addressed the civil rights issues with
The pool.
with the
The pool
pool
scene,
and
yeah.
Officer Clemens,
Right.
Which then they
Yeah.
repeated again later.
Yeah, they repeated
like
it.
15, 20 years later. They repeated
in
it.
the because the show, the first show, it was from 1968 to 1976. He had his first run of episodes. Then he stopped. He did Old Friends, New Friends, which was targeted to adults.
Yes.
That wasn't as good. But then
I actually enjoyed it, but that's just me.
it didn't. I would be something worth watching, but it wasn't. It didn't get
It
the.
didn't stick.
I mean, what he still had much more that he could do, and so he came back in 1979, and for 22 more years came out with more material, primarily through theme weeks, and you had an Officer Clemens scene in both. You had it you had the first in 1969, and then something more recent, probably in the 90s. But the first one, it was really, it was just at the heels of
The civil rights
civil
movement,
rights, but at this point, it was by the 90s. You have that sense of inclusion and diversity, but it seemed a bit more because at that point, Officer Clemens was a bit more comfortable. Even though you did get, you got an idea of who he was because he was a closeted.
Yeah, he was closeted. I was about to mention that. Yeah, I think that just these words, it kind of shows how you could put certain words in the right place at the right time, in the right tone, and things can be drastically
right.
different than if you were to say the same words in a different style in a different tone.
Well, Rogers wasn't faking it. Yeah, I think that's what it was. It didn't seem contrived.
No, he
It's
seemed
like
he was emotional as well.
Well, he was emotional, but I mean that's his true.
He was
truly
really
passionate
was.
about it. But like, it's not like he came up with a script.
No.
And said and
Remember, he threw away his
discussed it.
speech. He just said, "I got a speech for you, but
Yeah.
no script."
Right.
He was very. He was as calm and collected as one person could be in
High stakes situation.
in,
like
high
that,
sta-
right?
in as himself, but he would express his feelings through the puppets in the neighborhood of make believe. That was pretty much him demonstrating his ideas, his feelings, his concerns. Because Daniel Striped Tiger was literally him as when he was younger, when he was questioning things, and it's just that's where he displays his authenticity.
But it's just amazing what he was able to accomplish that day. And if he didn't, it could have been way different. Television could have been completely
Yeah,
different.
absolutely.
I think when we were thinking about Mr. Rogers, like what words he used, and about I love that movie, the Won't You Be My Neighbor? I think
Yeah,
it's called.
the documentary.
Oh yeah, the documentary, and then like the movie that they made
With Tom Hanks,
With Tom
Beautiful
Hanks.
Day in the Neighborhood.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was
yeah.
good too.
I feel like from the bits I've seen of Mr. Rogers, without actually like knowing him personally, but like from how he talked in his show and from how it seems like he talked to people, I feel like he really found a way to like talk to a child to like really connect. And I think in that he found like the most human way to connect with someone. And then he talks to adults, I feel like the same way he talks to children. Not that he dumbs it down for anybody, but he's just like so sincere and honest and unassuming and gets to like the heart stuff. Like
he used to
you know?
he wanted to be a pastor at first.
He was a Presbyterian minister, and he was going for first. He was going, but then he took. He was doing a television show, a kids show. As he was a producer, but he had someone else on it, and then
Wasn't Daniel Striped Tiger also in that show?
he made an appearance because they needed
Something in the moment, right?
something in the moment,
Yeah.
and so he just said what time it
It's like
was.
Mr. Rogers' Soul and Daniel Tiger. I feel like it's,
Yeah.
But
it really is.
what I thought was really interesting was the way he conveyed other forms of media, like the clowns and the pieing in the face and just the mindless, colorful images, which he made it sound very unsettling, and that this is what kids were responding to, and that this was not not an ideal. The only one that I would defend is Sesame Street, because he did use some.
He was on Sesame Street.
He did make it. He made an appearance in 1981, and they frequently made mention to him because all the characters, that's their favorite show. But he made an appearance in 1981 to help. First, he was helping judge a race between Big Bird and who was at the time the unseen Mr. Snuffleupagus. But then he came back to help Big Bird sort out the difference between real and pretend.
Mm-hmm.
But,
So,
Well, again, like I think he was able to speak to Pastore's own family. Maybe that's maybe that was the big hook that got him. Like, because he said he was concerned about children's programming and what the children, what the message they're getting now, and that they're in danger of.
it's also possible maybe that children weren't mentioned in other people's discussions for public
Right.
or maybe if they were, it wasn't like the focal point, and it may have just been passed over.
And I wonder too, if part of it was like both of what you're saying, and with the added part of just Mr. Rogers' tone of, I don't think a lot of times we appeal to the heart when we're like trying to get money for something. So Mr. Rogers wasn't really, I mean, he wanted money for the funding, but he was really appealing to the senator's heart. You know what I mean? Like talking to him.
He wasn't begging.
I don't think it was more.
Yeah.
I think it
agree
was.
with that.
I don't. To him, he was more concerned about what the money would do as opposed to the money itself. I think he
Yeah.
was more concerned about
Where it would go if it didn't go to public television. I keep saying
more so.
transportation, that's
I
what
think he
meant
was.
to say.
His chief concern was making sure that the children had a good source of television and how it could be used as a tool to help them and to make them better people, as opposed to the fact that he was getting $20 million.
Mm-hmm.
He was thinking he wanted to make sure that he could continue to display a positive philosophy, and not necessarily, more so about the philosophy itself than about him being the auditor of the philosophy. But
Well, speaking of the budget, I mean, it was amazing how his very first show, he mentioned that he was on a budget of like, what, $70 or $30?
I think maybe
or something.
30.
And then it went to, then it was the 2,000, for that, and then now it's $20 million.
because Sears Roebuck's Foundation,
Oh, yeah.
they were a sponsor up until 1991, so they were on for the entire. And the way that the show was, I mean, he never really cared about. It was, to him, it was, the message was more important than the visual effects, because he was using the same transition from reality to the neighborhood of make-believe up until the show ended. Maybe it was different during the first run, but in the second run it was all the same. It was just that circle turn to dusk and then pop up the neighborhood of make-believe.
And it's funny too, because as time went on, he probably had the funding to switch that up and make it more flashy. But I wonder if part of why he didn't do that was because, like, I feel like part of his show and who he is that, like, the normal things can be magical. You know, like that doesn't have to, like that everyday life can
like
be
the
magical.
there was that episode where he literally like did the crayons, you know, the crayons.
Oh,
And all it is just like several minutes of silence just watching the crowns being made, which I think is
that was
phenomenal.
when Mr. McFeely came and gave him the video for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember that one very fondly.
And then of course there was another one where he literally just sits and does nothing for a minute. Which is why I loved Mr. Rogers, because it wasn't all like in your face. It wasn't all like, you know.
I mean,
You know.
it's, yeah, the way that it's how to create. He was showing us how to make a paper airplane. I fondly
Yeah, it was
remember that
crazy.
one. It wasn't. He didn't need all these.
It was
It was just.
It's like, hey everyone, this is Mr. Rogers, blah blah blah, and today we're just gonna sit here for 20 minutes. You know, that's what it basically was. I mean, if you think about it, that kind of was what it was. And then you also had like the individual characters, and you also had like the show was just slow. It was slow. It was calm. It wasn't like in your face, and that's what I loved about it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't. I know what the word is, or I think I knew what the word is. I just forgot it. High energy. I'm not sure what the word is. Something that's like stimulating. That's the word. It was not stimulating. That's what it was. So it was good for me as a child because it was not stimulating. Sorry, it took me a minute to figure out the word I wanted.
It made sense.
Well, I found a clip of him, Mr. Rogers, putting up he was putting up a teepee. Did you ever see that?
Oh, I saw that in the movie.
That was
with
in
the
the
Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah,
I didn't see the episode.
Oh, when he was. I don't know if did they show the actual clip.
It was Tom Hanks was trying to put up a teepee and it kept breaking.
Oh,
Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, but he couldn't. I think he was trying to get it to fold up or fold out, and he was like really struggling with it, and he's pulling all sides, and then he jumped on it.
And then he said something like, "Oh, it's okay, things happen, mistakes happen, or something."
And I think he kind of tried to like jump on it to make it like decompress, and it bounced right back, and he picked it up and threw it, and he started laughing.
One thing that I'm really glad that they had in the film was the interaction that he had with Jeff Erlanger. At the time, he was a young boy in a wheelchair. It was a motorized wheelchair.
Oh, it's you I like.
Yes, and they sang that song.
And you know that when he won, I think it was
he was inducted into the Television Hall of Fame.
When he was, Jeff Erlanger was the one that announced his name, or something like that. He helped him
and
out.
He told him that you, for so many years, you were always telling people that it's them that you appreciated and liked, and today it's you that we like.
Yep.
Oh, that's so nice.
And
remember, he's an adult at this point.
Yeah.
And Mr. Rogers, and the speech that he gave was the same one he gave at the end of that movie, or the one that I want everybody here for 1 minute to think about somebody that's been special in your life. I'll watch the time. And that was...
So this is kind of turned in from just the one thing that Mr. Rogers said as a speech to pretty much everything that he said over time.
I think when...
Which is almost what I knew what was going to happen, because you cannot just...
Yeah.
With Mr. Rogers, he's just a wonderful man. And
you
may he absolutely rest in peace. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, you're right. You can't talk about him in that respect and not talk about everything else he's done.
Isolate this one
But
speech.
I think that one speech, the one
like
from court, the one with Senator Pastore, is the most important one over the course of time, and chronologically, that was the most important.
Would you, out of curiosity, what aspect or moment pertaining to Mr. Rogers do you think gets to you the deepest or the hardest, the one that would be most likely to cause you to choke up?
That's a good question. I would probably say it's going to be a toss-up. It's a toss-up between the very early bit with Assassination and Daniel Striped Tiger, and the very late one where he sits in front of the TV and talks about 9/11. They were both really, really good. So those would be my choices, I think.
Okay. Sarah?
Oh gosh, it's so hard to pick just two.
You don't have to pick, it doesn't have to even be particular moments, it could be general too.
Just general things?
Anything you want.
Okay, I'll just pick the first thing that comes to my mind. I think that I just love that he is the same with all people he talks to, because I feel like that can be really hard to do, and I think he just like sees like the inner child, just like the inner heart of like all people. And I don't know, I know the Tom Hanks movie was not him, but that's the one I've seen most recently, and I just think just the way that he kind of embodied the spirit of Mr. Rogers and how he talked to that adult guy who was like a writer or teacher, journalist, and he was able to just talk to him in a way that gave him space to think. And I feel like every time Mr. Rogers talks to anyone, it's like so easy to put yourself in that receiving standpoint. Just like picture that for yourself, and I don't know. That is my elongated answer.
It's like hitting all the low keys on a piano at once.
Yeah. Everyone can know that feeling.
Carl?
Well, he was very genuine, and that's why I think he's able to get the trust so easily of children and the senator. I think the trust was there, and it wasn't like he was one character on the show and another character like in real life.
Yeah.
I mean, that was him. He was like the real deal. So I like the fact that he got all those children to, you know, like the bond that he had with them, and you know, you instantly trust the guy.
I think it's the elaboration of the idea of the Jeff Erlanger discussion. It's you I like, where I think that us as people, we need to see one another. Just we have to appreciate one another just for who we are, and just appreciate everybody just for what they
a
offer.
running theme in the last couple of weeks for Literary Gladiators.
I guess it all comes down
The
to
golden
who's taking
rule.
part. Yep. But I would say that whole idea that Mr. Rogers appreciated everybody and treated everybody with compassion and
Humility.
and he saw and admired people just for who they were, and saw that everybody has something to bring, and that even if somebody has a particular trait that's different, anything that was, he embraced that, and he admired, and I think I do my best to abide by that, appreciating people just for who they are, and I think that's the one thing that gets to me about Mr. Rogers.
And just real quick, because it's just his patience as well. Just with the when he does something and just says, "Watch this" for a short period, watch this, instead of just like flashing lights and technology and stuff.
And just the fact that he addressed these things, where a lot of adults in that generation didn't want to talk to their kids about the war or any horrible thing that's going on in the world, but he addressed it in a way that would make the kids kind of, you know, understand a little bit better.
Yeah. And even the adults too. I feel like, as sometimes adults don't want to talk to their kids about it, they don't want to have to face it themselves. When you talk about war and racism, things that are really hard, and when he breaks it down, I feel like both the kids and adults can break it down, you know?
It's a good
And I think
their own
what helps
part.
is also the fact that it is on television.
He spent an entire week on divorce, which that was the week Jeff Erlanger made an appearance on that week, but his was for another situation. But I remember when,
I think I saw those
because Mr. McFeely, it started out with Mr. McFeely showing a video about his marriage, and then Mr. Rogers brought up, what if somebody, what if people are no longer in love with one another, and they cannot be married. And then Mr. McFeely very uneasily says, well, then they get a divorce, and then he heads on his way. And Mr. Rogers pointed out that Mr. McFeely was feeling somewhat uneasy about the situation, even though he has been in I think his marriage was ideal. Officer Clemens, because of his
closeteering.
Yeah, him being gay did not end very well. And Mr. Rogers was always, his marriage was a very strong one. Mrs. Rogers is still alive to this day, as at the time for filming this. So, do we have any final thoughts?
Mr. Rogers is a great man. And
Certainly
I thank
is.
Senator Pastore for listening as well, for listening to Mr. Rogers, and for Mr. Rogers to, you know,
Pull that off.
It's quite amazing.
We don't have any visuals, but we highly encourage. I'll leave a link down below to where you can find the Mr. Rogers' testimony to Congress, both the written and the video. And I would highly encourage you to check out "Won't She Be My Neighbor," because that really does a fantastic job displaying the life of a remarkable man, and in a very honest way, and it highlights everything that I expected. I think that there were things that I felt should have been that should be in the movie. It covered them all, and then also highlights particular things.
I should mention that Josh doesn't usually watch movies, so if he's saying this movie's good, then it's good. It's no lie, and I could say the same thing. It's an excellent movie, excellent documentary.
Yeah, I would say so.
Please won't you be my neighbor?
Alrighty. Thank you for tuning into this video, and be sure to join us next time for another episode of Gray Gladiators. For now, keep reading.
Bye, guys.
And cut.